Alright, so we are all done with page A3 and page A4. I've got everything laid out here so far. Ooh, A5. She is looking slightly more complicated. Not really though, I think we're just installing all of this into that plastic transmission case there. And they're definitely saying to use lots of that grease in here. So we'll get on that. Now they're not really saying to do this, but I'm doing it anyways. I put a little bit of moly grease into where that bearing is going, where that little rod is going that holds some of the gear set. Another little bit on that bearing cup. Same on this side, a little bit here, a little bit there. I mean, there's not as much there as what it looks like. I just kind of smeared it around the edge. And right here is where the shift rod slides through. So I just kind of wiped the goob across that hole. That way when you slide the shift shaft, the shifter through here, it'll kind of lube that up along the way. Alright, so I got this first set of gears in here with the shift fork. Everything is mildly greased up. A little spacer that went on the end there at the very end of the shift fork. There's a little shiny spacer there. I would like to point it out and show it to you, but I have both my hands busy. They want you to put grease in between the shift cog there and the gear on both ends. And I just put little lines of that black Team Losi / Moly grease all the way around the edge of that gear. Just put little lines here and there, just so once everything starts spinning, it'll be a nice even coat. And so now I'm going to finish up with this side, which is this next step, this little shift rod here, or little whatever, and slap on these gears and bearings, as well as grease that up. And that would be that little rod right there and those bearings. Now before I assemble all this, I'm going to need these 4 bearings, these 2 gears, 1 bearing, 2 bearing on either side of the gear, another bearing on either side of the gear before the rod goes through, and then this little micro spacer needs to go in between those 2. That is a bearing. Shift fork says nothing about this spacer. It says it right there, but it's not labeled anywhere else. It's not labeled on this page either. Sorry about that. I've got my transmission kind of sitting up in between the pliers there to make sure it all kind of stays together. More bearings. So once again, yeah, they don't mention anything about this little spacer, but it was in this bag with these screws and the little ball joint there. This is stuff that has to, the little ball joint and whatnot has to do with the shift linkage there. So nevertheless, yeah, no mention of this. And these bearings that I'm installing are not sealed bearings. So I did lay down a little pinch of moly in between before I installed these gears, just to give it a little bit of something extra, I guess. Not too much. You don't want it to, like, hydro lock in there and not be able to push it in all the way or whatever. So just a fine little line will do it. And just real quick, partially installed here. Put that little sleeve on there. I put a little teeny weeny bead of moly around the inside of that bearing that's on the inside of this gear here, as well as putting another little bead around that bearing there. That's going to be surface to surface on that little spacer. So I figured there probably should be a little bit of lubrication in between that and that little aluminum spacer there. Alrighty, so that little mess of gears is all installed there. Hopefully not over greased. And this should be the last little set of gears for the transmission, which are being dropped right down through here. And this should be the shaft for the spur gear. And with that, she is all together. Last thing to do is just to put the other case half on and then hook up the little shift arm servo attachment thingamabobber. I think that's the technical term, so we'll be right back. And then our next portion, bolting this baby together. We got these 2 long screws, which are going through right here on the top and right here next to it. And then we have a couple smaller screws and a couple other smaller screws. The 2 longer screws go through the transmission right up here. Oops, sorry, right here. And right down there, that little bottom hole that we're looking at. I can't point to it with one hand, right here. That would be these 2 guys. And then these 2 guys here go through this bracket and then into the side of the transmission right here and right here. And that would be this little plastic bracket right here, which bolts it down to the frame or to the bathtub chassis. So I'm going to go ahead and put these 2 longer screws in and the shorter screws and just kind of get them all started, and we'll go from there. Alright, so I got these started. We got the 2 longest screws, one here and one over here, right there. And the 2 next longest ones at the top and the bottom that go through the side of the case. Hold that in check. And then afterwards we will be using the last 2 small screws down here and that plastic bracket, and we'll put those on right over here. But I want to make sure to get these guys in and tighten down before I put these guys in, just to make sure that I have enough room with my Allen driver. Oh, big blinding light. Alright, so that is all assembled. All the screws are tightened down right there. I kind of think that there should be a screw going through this side. They've got one right here, one here, one here, one here, and one here. So that's covering this whole half of the case, but there's nothing over here on this side. I mean, I know it's getting pinched between the frame and you're going to be running the screws up through the bottom, but that's still not clamping it together. So that'd be kind of cool if there was a screw hole on that side, but oh well, it is what it is. As far as plastic strength as compared to a WL Toys, these transmission cases are definitely a harder plastic. I almost stripped out the screw head just putting this one in, so definitely harder plastic. Yeah, you can strip out the plastic. I haven't stripped it out, but I could see that happening. Not as easy as WL Toys. I mean, WL Toys will strip out in a heartbeat. This one, I think you're more likely to bust a screw head off or strip out the inside of the of that Allen head there before you end up stripping out the plastic. So just saying, food for thought. Once again, so far the plastic on the Vaterra twin hammers is a lot more solid and a lot more rigid, at least with the gearbox is concerned, compared to a WL Toys 10428. Like I said in the beginning of the video, I tore that one apart and had the transmission out of it, so I definitely know from experience on that. This is definitely a lot tougher. Oh, I should add, the last part that we're putting on here is this little bracket. I already have the screws installed, and we're going to put it on this way with those 2 tabs facing in, as according with the instructions. So we'll get to that. That being said about the plastic, these little guys right here, be careful with these guys because you're running some pretty small screws into this small little tube here, so that is possible to strip out, I would imagine, because you have a smaller thread on the screw, not much surface area in there. And it tells you in the manual not to over tighten this area. That little insignia there means to tighten it down. Same with that bolt, or these 2 bolts, and that's for the transmission halves. This side, it doesn't say anything like that, so I think you just kind of want to snug that down. Don't go crazy with it. Oh, blinding light again, man, I am so sorry. So here we go, last little step. We are going to be putting on this little bracket here for the shift arm that goes up to the servo that gets mounted on top here. So we're just going to bolt this little guy in place. Just takes a nut on the back edge, and the hardest part is going to be spinning that socket, or spinning that ball joint down into here and making sure that it's nice and straight. So I pretty much have it started straight. I'm just going to drive that little baby home real quick, and then I will slide this onto the shaft and bolt it up. Alright, so I used the old trusty box wrench here and spun that little guy down there, making sure not to strip that out. And then this needs to be slid onto the shaft right here, and it only goes on one way. You try to put it on this way, it's only going to go so far because there's like a little taper on that shaft, which you can't see, but there's a little flat spot here right there, and this will not go on unless you put it on in the right direction. And it sits upright, so there really isn't any screwing it up. And then it's just a matter of putting this little nut on right here and tightening it down. So we'll go and do that. And that is a little nylon lock nut that is on the end there, so you don't have to go crazy with tightening this down. You're putting that down onto a relatively small shaft here, so you definitely don't want to strip anything out. Alright, so that is the transmission. It seems to be fully assembled other than the spur gear. So we're going to flip pages here and see what's coming up next. Alright, put some of these empty bags off to the side here to throw away. It looks like they gave me one extra little Jesus clip, just in case you lose one, I'd imagine. I did double check everything just to make sure that I wasn't missing one somewhere. Alright, page A7, bag A2 with our slipper clutch assembly. Tighten the nut onto the shaft until the spring is fully compressed. Really? Really? We'll do that in a couple different languages apparently. Alright, so I guess we'll just bust out bag A2 as soon as I can find it here.